Hello, Tummy and Coos fans. It's me, Candace, here with another author event. I'm very, very excited. I always say that, but today I have three amazing authors that I'm so excited to have here to do this event, and I am going to introduce them. We are celebrating this book, A Marvelous Light, which is this way, A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske, and so I'm so excited to be celebrating this book today. So we are talking with Freya Marske, who is the author of A Marvelous Light and is one of the co-hosts of Be the Serpent, which I know a lot of you listen to. It is a Hugo Award-nominated podcast about science fiction, fantasy, fandom, literary tropes. Her work has been sold to Analog and has been shortlisted for Best Fantasy Short Story as well in the Aurelius Awards, and she lives in Australia. And she will be in conversation with Casey McQuiston. I know there are a lot of fans out there as well for Casey. Casey's the New York Times bestselling author of One Last Stop and Red, White, and Royal Blue. Try to say that 3 times fast, as well as a pie enthusiast. And Casey was actually born and raised here in South Louisiana and now lives in New York City. And we also have Hannah Whitten, who has been writing to amuse herself since she could hold a pen, and sometime in high school figured out what amused her may also amuse others. She is the author of For the Wolf, and when she's not writing, she's reading, making music, or attempting to bake. I love baking as well, so we're all here for that. And she lives in an old farmhouse in Tennessee, and there's probably some ghosts there, she says, which I am really into because, of course, New Orleans, we love the supernatural. So welcome to Freya, Casey, and Hannah. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Candace.
Yeah.
And I'm going
Thank you so
to
much.
remove myself from the situation and watch as shenanigans ensue.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I am Freya Marske. I am now regretting that there is nothing in my bio about baked goods because clearly there needs to be. We've got pie and baking. I also enjoy baking. And I am really thrilled to be celebrating the release of my debut novel, A Marvelous Light, which is about magicians, murder, and manor house parties in Edwardian England. It is a queer historical romance about a young civil servant who is accidentally named to the liaison position with a magical bureaucracy, has to deal with a curse, has to deal with not knowing anything about magic, and has to deal with his magical bureaucratic counterpart, a man called Edwin, who clearly doesn't like him. And if you know anything about romance, you know where that's going. So I am really thrilled to have Hannah and Casey here to celebrate the book release and talk about shenanigans with me. So I would like them to talk a bit more about themselves and their books. Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Whitten. I'm the author of For the Wolf, which is kind of a melting pot of a bunch of different fairy tales. You stick it in a carnivorous forest and you add a really angsty romance plot line, and this is what comes out. And I should also note that the attempting to bake, attempting is doing a lot of work in that bio because it is, it doesn't really turn out well, but I like to eat baked goods and therefore I try to learn to make my own baked goods. Also, we're probably not going to be seeing any ghosts from my farmhouse this evening, but Freya did inform me that my ring light makes it look like I'm haunting my own house. So here I am. This is as ghosty as we're getting.
And I assumed that it was my cue.
Sorry.
No, you're doing fantastic, especially for a ghost. I'm Casey McQuiston. I am the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue and One Last Stop. Red, White, and Royal Blue, if you haven't read it, is a queer new adults contemporary rom-com about the first son of the United States stumbling into like a sort of rivals to fake friendship to lovers type of arrangement with the Prince of England. And One Last Stop is about, I guess I would describe it as
strangers on the train with the New York City subway, but one of them is a hot butch lesbian displaced in time from the 1970s. And the other is like a reformed girl detective from the present day. And so those are my two books I have out. I have my third, which is a YA rom-com called I Kiss Shar Wheeler, coming out next year. I do like to bake, and I not to flex, but I did bake a goat cheese and sausage tart for dinner tonight. However, it was with store-bought puff pastry, so I don't think that counts.
That still counts.
No, that counts.
You win.
Sorry.
Anybody who makes their own puff pastry is definitely a witch.
Yeah, no, I don't think that those people should be trusted. But yes, I am very excited to be here, and I'm very excited to be talking to both of you. And I am going to go ahead and throw out our first conversation topic, because we're just going to kind of be keeping it loose and cute and talking about Freya's book, but also about things we love about books and fiction in general. So I want to just start off with kind of opening us up to talk about tropes, because I think all three of us, and I mean this as the highest of compliments because I love tropes, I think all three of us are pretty tropey writers in the best and most delightful way. And I think just to start off, Freya, do you want to talk about what you think is wonderful about tropes in fiction and why you'd like to explore them and play with them?
Yes. So for me, the thing about tropes is it makes a reader feel safe. You're going into the unknown. You're picking up a book. Maybe you don't know the writer. You don't know this world. You don't know these characters, especially in fantasy and science fiction, where there might be a pretty steep learning curve with world building or unfamiliar terms or unfamiliar magic. If you know that there's a trope in a book, or even if you can just pick up in the early pages that you can sense a trope, you can sniff it out, it's coming for you. You think, okay, even if there's something unfamiliar here, there is something that I know that I like, and it'll keep you reading. And I think that's why we started to see more and more people marketing their own books or talking about their own books in terms of tropes. So it's a way of saying, trust me, I'm going to do something that you like, but I'm going to do it in a way that is new to me. And so for me, putting together A Marvelous Light, it was really important for me to think, which romance tropes am I doing here? Which tropes of the manor house party full of terrible people? Like, what things am I playing with here? What are the ingredients that people will find familiar? But then how do I use all of those ingredients to make something that's new and fresh?
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about tropes, is that they're like a big toolbox. And you can use them to do basically whatever you want. You can build them all together, and a bunch of different people using the same trope are all going to do it a little bit differently. But it does kind of, it signal, like Freya was saying, it signals to the reader that like there will be something that you like here, because we're setting up those expectations early, so you kind of know what you're getting into. And I think it's a good way to kind of, especially if you were doing a big like fantasy series, it's a nice way to kind of usher a reader into like, I'm going to do a lot of stuff that you're going to have to really pay attention to, but here's also some things that will feel familiar.
Yeah, I think also it's kind of like, I don't want to say a shortcut because that sounds like it's like less work, but it is kind of like a shorthand for getting your reader into emotional investment with a character fast. Because when a reader, you know, a lot of times I struggle, like as somebody with a short attention span, when I open up a new book, sometimes it's like, man, there's nothing about these characters. Like I have to get to know them from scratch. And it's like, there's nothing about them that I know yet. And, you know, I think especially as people who read fantasy, we want to have like maybe like a little bit of like a, no, I don't want to like immediately jump to fan fiction, but like that is kind of, it's like when you you know, you've already got investment there, you know, like when you pick up like a really great fanfic, like you are already sold on those characters. Tropes are kind of a similar vibe of like, you know, we already have emotional investment in tropes, and we have characters that we love that fit those tropes. And so when we pick up a book and we see that trope and it's familiar, we're like, all right, done. I already care about this character because I've cared about characters like this before, and I can get invested, and I'm like with you, and I'm going to follow you on this weird little journey that we're about to go on together. Just my thoughts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think especially when it comes, I agree completely about the fan fiction thing. Like, it's the same thing. That's what the shortcut is in fan fiction, is that you have that pre-investment. And so I can sit down and say, oh, read my book. It's got a jock nerd romance in it.
Yeah.
Like, set in Edwardian England, one of them is a sunshine himbo and the other one is a prickly librarian nerd. And, you know, even though you know nothing else about these characters or the context that they exist in, if that is the kind of thing you like to read, you already know you're probably going to enjoy the romance part of things. And that does so much heavy lifting for you.
I also love taking things like a magical liaison and the like little librarian man who knows all the things and being able to distill that down into like, it's a sunshine himbo. Librarian man. I find that delightful.
Well, I think, and also I'm going to ask you to talk about your favorite, I guess, romance tropes. But for me, anything that creates that forced proximity is definitely what I am a sucker for. So I love fake relationships. I love marriages of convenience, especially if there's some kind of political or like other stakes attached to it. Anything that means these two people have to be in each other's company and probably work towards some kind of quest/goal, especially if they don't particularly want to be there at the beginning. That for me is like the perfect alchemy to start a romance off.
Yes.
I love there's like, I don't know if any of you've ever watched the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. There is an entire song on that show that's like, it's called Trapped on an Elevator with Someone You Don't Want to Be Trapped on an Elevator With, or something to like along those lines. And it's a whole song about how sexy it is to be trapped in a small space with someone you don't want to be trapped in a small space with. And
absolutely,
I think like, I don't know, it's the best trope. It's such a good trope.
It's just insta chemistry. I love it too. I feel I like find a way to sneak forced proximity in there, regardless of what I am writing. I love a marriage of convenience for reasons, be they like magical, political, whatever. I love a marriage of convenience. I love their like taking the forced proximity one step further and going like, there's only one bed, or we have to share a room for reasons. Anything anything that's gonna like bring that intimacy to characters who are not ready for it yet. I love that. That's good stuff.
Kissing to avoid suspicion.
Yes. I wrote that the other day. It's like the book that I'm drafting, Foxglove King, the book that I'm drafting right now. I got to write a quick, we must make out in order to avoid suspicion scene. And it was
I love that so much. Like, and it's one of those things about tropes. You'd think, you know, is it overdone? No. Put it on the page. This again, my favorite flavor. Yes.
No, I think I also think that basically any pretense for kissing, anytime it's like, oh, we're kissing, but we have to kiss because of this reason, whether it is oh, we are like playing a part, or we are, oh my god, I've done in One Last Stop, there's a lot of kissing for research, like kissing to recover memories, but it's strictly scientific. Love that. I just love any pretense to be like, oh yeah, no, it's just about the ends. It's not about the means at all.
Anything that lets you sit back as a reader and be like, you are all lying liars who lie.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's half the fun of a romance, you know, capital R romance, the romance arc, the romance beats, is that the reader knows where it's going. And because you know where it's going, part of the fun is being 2 steps ahead of the characters, emotionally speaking. Like, you can sit there and go, no, you really do like each other. You do want to jump that person's bones. You just haven't worked it out yet. And so you get that smug sense of it's coming, and you get to wait for it to arrive. I
love that first moment of reading a romance book where, like, you know, they're going to fall in love in the first moment of like attraction. And like whenever you get there and you're like,
yes, now you've put on.
I really love. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I was going to move this on. I was going to say, Hannah, you talked about like reasons that people might have to kiss or like be married, including magic reasons. So I want to hear a bit more, especially from your perspective, about how you think magic in a book feeds into romance tropes and what you can do in a speculative book with romances that's particularly fun.
I love the idea of like magic systems that require some sort of balance, where you have to have like balance. I don't know why I'm trying to like over explain the term balance. We know what balance means, but that lends itself really well to doing romancy things with it, I feel like, or like just relationship things with it in general, where you have two people that have like different powers, or they have the same one, and the whatever they're trying to do requires two people, stuff like that. I think that it helps you develop a magic system that kind of feels more real, but it also lets you have moments of like, oh, and now we have to kiss for this magical reason to like seal this spell or do this thing. And it just all blends together very seamlessly, which I really like. And I do think it depends too on kind of how you build your magic systems, and like what you want the magic system to do. And if you want to have a magic system that's going to give you more romance interludes, then you can do that. And I always want that. And was that something that you were doing whenever you were building your magic system, Freya? Because it was so intricate, like the mechanics of it.
I think I disappoint a lot of people with this question, because everyone's like, how did you build the magic? I'm like, I made it up as I went. So the magic in a marvelous light. I'm a very planning kind of person when it comes to character arcs, relationship arcs, and plot. But the world building, and especially the magic world building, that's the thing that I like to discover as I go along, which was definitely reflected in my first draft. My first draft was I'll just throw in whatever I want at the time. Got to the end of it, had to work out the proper arc of the trilogy and what happens in books 2 and 3, and realized that I hadn't actually thought through the magic system very well. But I think it reflects, the magic system in A Marvelous Light reflects the characters in it, and especially reflects Edwin, who is a very analytical thinker. So for him, it is all about what are the rules that magic goes by? How do you learn it? You know, what are the constraints that you're under? And I quite like constraints around magic. I'm a sucker for a school or university story where magic rules are taught, and there's, you know, how do you learn a spell? How do you construct a spell? Where does the practice of magic come from? How does it differ from place to place? I know I could just read pages and pages of somebody learning things, which some people find really boring. So when I was constructing it, I was always thinking, like, is this on one hand logical, because that's who Edwin is, but on the other hand, you have, and I guess this is sort of a balance, even though Robin is not a magical person, everything is new to him. So I wanted that sense of wonder to come through, of not everything is quite explainable, especially if you're seeing it for the first time. There is this sense of the numinous and, you know, something that's not quite falling within rules. And as the trilogy goes through, you'll see more and more of that type of magic, that you can't quite explain it. It's just wonder, which I love. And I really admire people who can just throw that at the page in the way that you do. And because I think I would feel a little bit like I was working without a net in that sense. Like, I need to have some rules just to feel safe.
Yeah, I feel like my process with writing magic systems is very much figuring out how I want it to look and what I need it to do first, and then making it do all those things. And then all my revising is going back and being like, okay, what rules can I put around this that will not constrain how I want it to look or what I need it to do and still make sense?
Well, I wasn't really thinking in terms of, like, I was thinking always about the romance and the relationship, but I think I got to a point where it was like, well, what can the magic add to this? And the answer turned out to be magic used during sex. Like, great, let's go with that. That sounds fun.
What else are you gonna do with it?
Exactly. I mean, they didn't have a beautiful magical soul bond, so I guess it's magic in bed instead. Because I think, you know, not for myself, but in other works, I love when magic is used to do that forced intimacy thing, whether it's some kind of soul bond or whether it's telepathy, anything that forces you to suddenly know somebody closely more early than you would possibly have chosen to know them, because then you have that immediate plunge into, you know, Pacific Rim, the Drift. You have to know somebody completely intimately, and, you know, there's nothing to hide. And that's really what the romance dream is about. It's about being completely known. and still loved.
Yeah.
And you can really take some interesting shortcuts with magic and sci-fi to get to that point.
We had a couple questions over here. Do you have a beloved trope that you find rare or uncommon? Is there anything that you want to see more of?
Casey.
I love a moral decay.
A moral decay.
Ooh, okay.
The opposite of a redemption arc.
Yes. I feel they're pretty rare, I think, or maybe I just haven't come across many of them, but I love whenever people are like, we're just gonna go full evil, and like seeing that fall. I also love redemption arcs too, though. So I mean, I'll take either one, but moral decay.
I don't know if this is uncommon, but it's one that like I specifically am like writing into the next thing I'm working on right now, which is because the next thing I'm working on is like a exes to back to lovers situation.
Yes.
And this is like a trope that I know that I've seen other places, and I can't think of any examples right now, but it's like, okay, so your ex is like sleeping with somebody else to make you jealous, but the new person does not know how to get the ex where they need to go the way that their ex does. And so there's like an element of like, you're doing it wrong, I will show you. This is a trope that I feel like I've seen somewhere. Sort of a competitive, I guess, instructional sexual trope that I have.
I was about to say, please tell me this is involving threesomes. Please.
Well, it's one of, I do think like another trope I love is like a threesome where it becomes apparent that one person does not need to be there. And that person is like, interesting. And then
Goodbye.
It's a great, listen, we're here to talk about romance, and this is the trope I'm working with right now in my current work in progress. And so I feel like, I guess I just generally don't see enough. I would love to see more like fun multiple party dynamics in romance in general.
Absolutely.
But specifically like competitive, like sleeping with somebody to make somebody else jealous, like perhaps in front of them type of trope is fun, and love to see more of that.
Yeah, that really like digs into the id. I think there's something about that that's just so compelling.
I endorse them.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be playing with in the next book that I'm about to write, which is book 3 in this series. And I love a really messy power imbalance. Like where one person does hold a lot of a particular type of power, no matter what it is, and the other one doesn't. And how do you actually navigate that towards a romance? You know, if it's going to be a satisfying romance of equals, how do you do that when you're not actually equals on a couple of different planes? Like I find that really, really fun to play with, like to really dig your fingers into the mess of that.
Yeah. That's one of those like auto-buy tropes for romance books for me. Like if we get a real good power imbalance, I'm one click in that. I would like to see it.
Yes. We got some other questions coming in, I think.
What's a trope that's in your work in progress right now?
Oh, I just threw mine out. So
yeah. Power imbalance. Okay, well, I'll say one more that's in the one that I'm about to work on is there is some stuff in A Marvelous Light about magical houses, and I am going hard on that in book 3. Like really weird, fucked up magical house bullshit. So
good.
Love a magical house.
Yes. I love especially like scary magical houses. I don't know, something about like architectural, like whenever things in a house are not the shape that they're supposed to be, or like it's bigger on the inside than the outside. That gets me. That creeps me out every time. It sounds great.
I love a sentient house, like a house that has like a personality.
Yeah. Just sentient settings in general. I'm for them.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up. I'm doing okay, For the Throne, which is my next book that's coming out next summer. It's the sequel to For the Wolf. Has a enemies. I'm not going to say enemies to lovers, but it's enemies to something that is not enemies anymore. Line. And then Foxglove King. I'm doing a love triangle because I want to.
Are we allowed to ask if it ends in threesomes?
Yeah.
Is that too scary?
I am still in that, like, the outlining stage for book 3. I'm not ruling it out.
That's another trope that we need more of. We need
keep working on you
more.
about that one.
Yeah, more love triangles that resolve in polyamory.
Yep.
We have so many good questions, actually.
So someone said it's a weird quirk that helps you while writing, and then somebody else has said writing programs that we use. So we could have a bit of talk about writing process, I guess, like what that looks like for each of us. I use Scrivener because I am an outliner, so I need to sit down and know where does it start, where does it end, what's the midpoint, usually what the romance beats are, and then I have to have like a scene by scene breakdown, even if the scene is just one sentence, this is what happens here, before I can start writing, because I need to know that I have a structure to follow, and Scrivener is really good for that. And so I usually draft, my first drafts are usually fairly clean because I put a lot of effort into the outline before I begin, and things do change along the way. I do come to a scene and think, no, I don't need this anymore, or actually this is better going to be somewhere else. And so I don't do a lot of hauling things around in edits because I hate editing. So I'd rather preload all of my effort, outline it, and then draft it relatively clean.
Wow, that sounds nice.
That sounds amazing. That sounds so much less stressful than.
Yeah. I just use Microsoft Word because the idea of like going to compile things from Scrivener and it suddenly not working makes me break out in a cold sweat. So I have not made the jump yet, but I love how you can add backgrounds and stuff. So I'll probably do it eventually just for that. But I tend to get an idea and I'll often write almost a query letter for it before I really like dig into it, because something about putting it in that format of like trying to entice someone else into reading it. If I can do that and still be excited about it, it like also entices me into writing it. And helps me kind of figure out a very basic arc. So I'll do that. And that's usually about all like the front end planning that I'll do before I decide to see how far I can draft before I run out of steam. So I'll write like the first like 3 or so chapters. And then once I hit a point where I don't know what I'm doing anymore, then I will outline, but it is a very messy outline. I do kind of like a chapter summary thing where I guess it's technically a zero draft because I will go through and like write the entire book, but instead of writing chapters that like are actually narrative, it'll be like, and then they go here and then they do this. And if I can come up with good dialogue or something that I know specifically I want to happen there, then I'll write it so that I have a record of it, but I'm not trying to make it sound good. So then once I have that, I will try to make it sound good. And usually when I'm like doing the actual drafting, going off of that outline, I will find things that I don't need anymore, or things that I need to move around and do them in the draft versus in the outline generally. And then I just have notebooks full of very, very messy notes.
See, my messy notes are this is what I like Scrivener for, is that as I get through, I'll think of something that needs to happen, like, 2 chapters ahead, and then I can just go to that part in the outline and put it in the notes column for that scene. And as I go through the book, the notes for each chapter become more and more comprehensive. And often by the time I get to the last quarter of the book, the notes are basically like dot points worth of dialogue, like half the scene is written in a really sketchy way, which allows me to kind of cheat and jump ahead and quickly jot down the scenes I'm excited about without actually writing them. So I can still save them as treats for myself when I actually get to them. Yeah, that's why Scrivener works.
Freya's like blowing my mind right now. I'm seeing a vision of like what life could be like if I was not a disaster.
If I sat down with a blank page, no books would ever happen. I would just sit there and go,
Yeah.
What I don't know what I'm doing. But then
That sounds so much
it, like
more.
it sounds very organized. Like it sounds like I sit in like beautiful meditative silence and words just flow. But writing a scene, like I was writing in a cafe with Emily Tesh, and we were both working on books together, and she turned and looked at my screen and was like, what are you doing? Because when I'm drafting a scene in the scene, I'll like get halfway through a paragraph and be like, oh, something that's going to happen like 2 paragraphs down. I'll jump down and do like draft stuff, and then I'll come back up, and then I'll go down again. So the scene itself looks like a chaos mess, and then somehow prose happens in between. But occasionally I will go through afterwards and find that I've just left sentences unfinished because my brain thought of something 2 sentences down and quickly went and did that and then forgot to go back. So there's this great high level structure, micro level chaos. That's my process.
I love it.
Wow.
I just keep a running list in my very messy notebook that at the top says like things to fix later, and then there's bullet points.
Oh yeah, there's definitely notes like that as well.
I feel like Freya is like sort of like lawful good and Hannah is true neutral, and I'm over here chaotic evil because I draft in Google Docs.
Oh God.
Which I know is terrible, but I've been burned too many times like drafting in like on my computer, and I am just like so scared of losing stuff. But that means that like, I mean, there are parts where like I'm like, okay, I can't focus on this one scene if I know that the rest of the book is here. So I'm going to start a new Google Doc, and I'm just going to draft this one scene in this Google Doc, and I'm going to copy and paste it over. And it's just like, and then like by the end of the book, it's like every time I sit down to write, I'm just writing in a new fresh document and copying and pasting it over. It's horrible. And I don't know why I do this. And I'm like starting to draft a new book, and I'm like, what if I actually like loved myself this time around and just did what Freya is describing? Maybe it would change everything for me. I don't know. It might.
Maybe I would write faster in a Google Doc. I don't know. I still write fan fiction in Google Docs. Like that's where it is.
Too, actually, now that I think about it, do you find that whenever you write fan fiction, do you write it in a different tense? Sorry, this is a random question because I figured that out
I think
the other day.
I still default to present tense for fan fiction mostly.
Yeah,
I think, and it was weird because now I've now written 2 contemporary romance novels as well, and when I was writing them, I found that I was writing present tense kind of automatically because in my brain something about it was more fanficky, even though it wasn't.
Well, most contemporary romance these days is in present tense.
Yeah, I found I always write like my books in past, but anytime that I write fan fiction, it comes out in present. And that was like not a conscious decision that I made. It just happened to me. So
yeah, when you're right, like so much of fan fiction is present tense, and because I think for me it's because I did a lot of like live journal role play stuff, which is all present tense. And then when I was writing fan fiction, it was also all present tense. And so I think for me, when I started writing original, it was just like, okay, past tense is a signal to my brain that now we're working in a different sphere.
Now
and then when I jumped back to contemporary romance, there we go. It went back to present again.
Oh, we have a question for Freya in the chat.
Ooh, okay. So this question says, the Edwardian aesthetic is so fun and original for magic. Love the theme of houses and arts and crafts in the book. How did Morris wallpaper come into your life? Okay. So slightly convoluted answer to this one. The Edwardian setting came about because of book 2. So when I first came up with the idea for this magical bureaucracy romance, I wasn't quite sure what time period I wanted to set it in, but I knew that book 2 was going to involve an ocean liner. So book 2 is entirely set on a transatlantic ocean liner at the time of the Titanic. So I was like, what year Titanic?
1912.
Now we have a setting. And so I was like, okay, Edwardian aesthetic. And so I started doing a bit of research, and I fell head over heels for the arts and crafts movement. My mum had always loved William Morris, and we always had a lot of Morris designs in our house, but I'd always thought of them as something slightly fusty that, you know, your parents are into. And then I rediscovered Morris and like Tiffany glass and De Morgan tiles and the entire arts and crafts movement. I took a trip to Glasgow and found out like the Glasgow School. There was some really, really gorgeous visual stuff happening in Glasgow at the time, with a very distinct style. And then I visited Whitten Manor, which is a National Trust house in the Midlands in England, which is completely done up in the arts and crafts style. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. And if you wander into the main library / sitting room parlour of Whitten Manor, having read A Marvellous Light, you can probably see a few things that I stole and just carefully put into the big house, Penhallock House in the book. So for me, it was just a bit of an accident, but then I got really into the aesthetic. And I'm really glad I did, because I think it did give the book a unifying aesthetic. And it meant when it came to things like the cover design and just like how we are packaging it visually, there was this really nice inbuilt aesthetic of the arts and crafts movement. Yeah.
I think it worked really well with your voice too. The Edwardian setting, like the voice writing, because you have this very like, there's this dry, like very wry sense of humor in it that I thought worked really well with the setting.
I have a slightly historical fiction-y kind of voice, which has made it quite interesting trying to jump to contemporary fiction. I get reading, like, something about this narration is a little bit not quite what it needs to be. So I'm still learning to adapt my voice to contemporary, because I think, yeah, this kind of setting is really comfortable for me. I still had to do quite a lot of research into not necessarily speech patterns, but like where people would be coming from and the way that you can make a character feel authentically of the time while writing with a fairly contemporary voice.
It's such a difficult balance to do, and you do it so well.
Thank you. What else have we got? Ooh, what's a genre you'd love to explore? Something you haven't written in yet.
I would actually really love to try historical romance, like capital R, like genre romance. Perhaps someday.
I think you could crush that, Hannah.
Thank you. Right now,
could.
the amount of like research that would be required intimidates me.
So much of it really is finding the aesthetic, and you are very good at aesthetic.
Right.
Like, I think you just have to know. Because that's what people are in historical fiction for. It's like, what's the vibe? You know, that like level of fun detail.
Yeah. I think I'm intimidated by doing historical romance for the same reason, is the research. And it's not even like necessarily like speech or anything like that. It's just like the minutia. Like, historical romance readers know so much about like how many eyes a corset should have.
Yes.
You know, like based on what year it is. And it's like, oh, someone's definitely going to catch me with my pants down on that.
I'm so bad at describing clothes just in general, beyond like they are all wearing clothes, that the idea of trying to do like a Victorian romance with like all the different kinds of clothes, I'm like, no.
So many undergarments.
Yeah, you're wearing a shirt, you're wearing a skirt. That's all you got. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Marvellous Light is 2 male main characters, and luckily they don't notice clothes a great deal. Like, they notice them as class markers, because that's what you would notice them as a class marker. Book 2, both of the main characters are women, and there is so much clothing. And so, especially with the undergarments and things, I found a YouTube video of somebody who's like a historical costumer, and the entire video was an Edwardian lady getting dressed, like starting from the lowest level of the undergarments, and like showing how you like built that up and what they all were and how they went on. And I was like, this is great, because obviously if you're writing, you know, especially a romance, you've got to know how many layers there are to take off, right? And then what order they need to be taken off, and which ones need to be taken off for sex to happen, and
what's the minimum number of layers
openings. You know, because like I was looking at this and he's like, actually drawers, you know, we think of drawers as just like long, short, like underwear. A lot of them had like an opening in the front, because so you didn't take them off if you were going to the bathroom. I'm like, oh, opening,
very convenient,
handy. Very useful for sex scenes. So I took a bit of a deep dive into Edwardian underwear for book 2.
Good.
My God.
Good information to have.
Yeah.
That leads nicely into, Casey, you mentioned something about like writing books that are sexy that might not necessarily just be like all sex.
Well, To put it coarsely, what I said was a book that fucks is not necessarily just about the fucking.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is like there's so many things that can make a book sexy or horny that may not even explicitly have to do with sex. And I feel like that is something that both of you do really, really well in your writing. And I would love to just hear you talk about how you develop just sort of like an atmospheric horniness in a book, even if it's not just about sex.
Yes. I worked very hard to create an atmosphere of horniness. And I think for me, it came down to just focusing on very physical aspects. Like somebody asked me recently actually about how much I focused on hands whenever I was writing. And like part of it is just that I am someone who talks with my hands, but also just hands are sexy. And it's not a big mental jump to see like somebody handling like an object very closely to like, okay, well, how would they handle my objects kind of thing. And yeah, just focusing on that, like the very small physical tics that you are only in tune to someone when you are warm for that form is a good way to like telegraph these people are very into each other, even if they have not explicitly like said something about that in their narration, because you don't notice the way that a man drinks his coffee unless you want in those pants.
So, all right, this is going to be like really like nuts and bolts here.
Yes, let's hear it.
So Marvelous Light has 2 points of view, like a lot of classic romances do. So you get to see each character from the other person's point of view. So the way I built up an atmosphere of horniness was I made sure that when we were in somebody's element, like somebody's most natural context, where they would appear the most competent, the most at home, and the most natural, we were in the other person's point of view. So for example, Edwin, we see the library at the house, and we see Edwin working in the library among these books that he has catalogued himself, you know, in his element, being very competent. And we get all of that from Robin's point of view. Like you get the immediate like sensory physical detail of the library, which is a stand-in for the sensory detail of Edwin himself. So we start big with noticing the library. We go down to noticing the figure of Edwin in the library. And then later in the scene, we get down to things like how is the light shining off his hair? Like what is the actions of his body interacting with the books? And it's really like a very prolonged, oh shit, he's hot moment stretched out over an entire chapter. And then you flip it and you get something similar when they are doing like outdoor sports and rowing. And Edwin does not like sports. Edwin is not a sports person, but he sees Robin with his sleeves rolled up, forearms exposed, rowing. You know, he was a rower at Cambridge and stuff. And he's noticing all these details about, suddenly we're seeing Robin doing something he's very good at. And his, oh no, he's hot moment, he's very angry about. He's like, oh, can't believe I'm attracted to this person. But for me, that's how you build up that kind of horniness and sustain it. Even before they've touched, even before they're thinking about each other in that way, you can infuse an entire scene with somebody's essence and have the person whose point of view you're in go, oh, oh no.
I'm like blushing.
I also love whenever you get to the point where they do touch and you just focus on it very intently, like very small. Anytime that there is a physical contact, everybody is like, I am noticing this physical contact.
Right. Yes. Yes. Small touches that are like blown up out of proportion, or like that seems casual to the other person, but then your narration just fixates and hyperventilates about that touch for 2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Like it's the equivalent of
one of my favorite
touching the hand, flexing the hand. And you can tell he's going, he's going inside to like lie flat on
the blueprint.
Go, oh god, I touched her hand.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in Wolf that was a oh shit, he's hot moment after that had already been well established. But there's a like morning scene where Eamon stretches and like his shirt rides up and Red is like drinking a cup of tea and she goes like it's like she choked on it and burnt her mouth and he's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, it's cool, I'm fine.
Oh, look, Is it really a romance if somebody's clothing has not ridden up to show a sliver of skin that the other
A
person then
sliver
freaks out
of
about?
skin.
Really?
Oh my God.
Classic.
I had like, I recently wrote my first YA romance. And there are so many things that like, I was like, oh, I really rely on like being able to spell these things out and like, you know, having characters who are like a lot more sexually experienced. And so there was so much of like having to figure out like writing sexual tension in a way that was like kind of PG-13. And that was actually a really fun challenge because I think so much of being a teenager is being like just absolutely unholy horny terror and having and just being so horny all the time and absolutely having no sex at all. That's like what being a teen was, at least for me. And so like there's so much of like there's so many things that are not sex but are sex in the book of like one person like opening a card from the other and she's just like idly like running her finger up and down the crease of the card, and it's it's not sex but it is,
Yeah.
you know. And like that is so like it was really actually a very fun like exercise for me as a writer in figuring out like writing like a book that fucks without having any fucking at all in it. And I think that's like what being I think that's like good romance, and that's what being a teenager is.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So there's a question about the themes of feminism in book 2, since there are cool hints at suffragettes and male-dominated magical systems in book 1. Yes. Okay. So book 1, yes, the magical system is male-dominated, and I had to make a very, I guess, decided choice about that. I was building a historical setting. I had to decide, do these gender roles that we see in Edwardian English society get replicated among the magicians, or are the magicians just way more progressive than everybody else and anyone can do anything? And it just because of the nature of the story I wanted to tell, I thought it would work better if there is a very much a reflection of the gender roles at the time. So Robin's little sister Maud is very much a sort of like young suffragette, chafing against the constrictions placed upon her by Edwardian society. And we see that the magical system also doesn't really think much of what kind of magic women should be allowed to do. But the plot that links all 3 books together is actually about what's been happening behind the scenes and what have women magicians been doing in the previous century that they have been working on without men's knowledge, and what kind of magic have they been doing and discovering. And so book 2 takes that a lot further. You get a lot more of the backstory in book 2 as to like what's happened in the past that's leading us up to the culmination of the plot and the present. And because both of the main characters are women, you get a lot more about the roles of female magicians and how does that differ in England and other places, and what kind of magic might they be expected to do. So if you liked those hints in book 1, book 2 is just stuffed full of them.
I'm excited.
I love that.
How do you guys decide between first person or third person? Or is it a conscious decision at all? Or does it just happen?
I'm not very good at first person.
Yes.
I tried with One Last Stop. Actually, I wrote the entire first draft in first person, and then changed the entire book to third after writing the first draft. And it was really because I realized kind of counterintuitively that writing in first person was making it harder for me to get to know my POV character, because I was too much viewing her as like a different version of myself through my own eyes, you know, if that makes any sense. Like it was easier for me to picture her as a complete character if I was looking at her from the outside rather than looking out through her eyes. And so it really made me realize that like third person was actually a huge part of how I get to completely understand my main character.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I think if I started to write something in first person, I would struggle to get into it because I don't know my characters that well at the beginning. And you have to know somebody really well to do the first person voice. So for me, what will let me draft something is knowing that I am drafting in my voice. but I get to know the characters, and I write very close third, so I discover things like, what kind of metaphors does this person think in? Like, how does their mental narration work? But I can be secure in the knowledge that I don't necessarily have to know that until the end of the draft. Like, I've written a couple of short stories in first person, and they've always had a little bit of a gimmick to them. Like, one person has been addressing somebody else, or it's been, you know, a letter or something else like that. And so that helps me get into somebody's voice if they are directly addressing another character. But just first person, just this is what the narrative is, I'm putting it out into the void, I would find that really difficult to begin, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
I think if I had any other questions for you. Oh, yes. I wanted to ask about, tell me about an early piece of media that, looking back, shaped how you think about romance and what a good romance should be. And I'm going to go first and say, for me, it was definitely The Mummy, the movie. And because I think of, like, what's good romance? It's got a lot of adventure. It's got a fantasy element. It's got two separate, oh shit, they're hot moments. Like, perfect, the entire package.
Yeah, it was really just hitting on all cylinders there.
God, that's such a good one. That is such a good one.
Yeah.
You don't have to name another one. We can just sit here and sigh about The Mummy if you want. But I always like hearing about, like, formative romance.
Some will be in silence for 10 minutes.
Last 10 minutes with The Mummy.
I'm gonna put two. The first is Spike and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I recently rewatched the show with my spouse for the first time. He'd never seen it before. And we were just the whole time we're like, nobody is serving what this was serving. Like, this has not been paralleled. So that, for just peak enemies to lovers vibes. And Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Like with The Mummy, I feel like that's a very similar vibe.
Yeah, adventure, fantasy.
Yeah.
Like,
they squashed and they buckled, man.
They sure do. Oh my God. I mean, I feel like the first thing that came to mind, and this might just be because I just started listening to a podcast about all of the horses in the Lord of the Rings. Which is
a very niche podcast.
It's so niche. It's like a friend of my like a friend of a friend's. It's called Shadow Facts, but like FACTS.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
And it's Lord of the Rings horse by horse is how it's described. But so I genuinely thought of, like, being in middle school and watching, like, Aragorn and Arwen on screen for the first time, and how, like, intensely it was just like, it just lit up like every part of me. It was what I wanted to be. It was what I wanted to write. It was what I wanted to aspire to. It was like my gender and my sexuality simultaneously somehow. It was everything.
Manifested.
It was everything. I became myself watching that. So I feel like I really have to shout that out. Just if only for the fact that I think that it, like, created a very, very, like, load-bearing column in my brain that day. When I saw that. And I think that because of that, my like bar for, like, how invested I want to get in a romance is, like, well, is it literally about, like, your eternal soul, like your, like, life and death, and, like, are you going to live forever or not, type of thing. And, like, yes. And, like, is one of you gonna, like, literally die of heartbreak? You know, I need to know. So I would say that's probably one of them for me.
I think the great thing about that one as well, like, it's got those epic stakes, but also there's only enough of it on screen that you catch at the edges of it.
Yes.
And I think especially for those of us who are, like, fanish and fan writers, there's something so appealing about something that says, here's the tropes, here's the epicness, now fill in the gaps yourself.
Yes.
Because you can just, like, lie in bed and dream about, like, all the missing pieces of that romance, which in a way that you couldn't if the entire movie was about the romance.
Yeah, and it's so rare to get that, honestly, from, like, a hetero pairing in, like, a, like, franchise movie. Something that's, like, so beautifully, like, just so, like, full tilt, high stakes, but also so, like, restrained and so, like,
understated.
so, like, oh my God, give me more of it, you know, so good.
The first book length thing I ever wrote was a self-insert Lord of the Rings fan fiction.
Oh my god! Wait, who were you making out with?
Both Legolas and Aragorn.
Good for you. At the
Yeah.
same time.
I wasn't once, yeah.
Ooh,
I wasn't gonna
I
make
love
myself choose.
good for
No,
you.
no choosing, just take it all. Yep.
Just
Good
take
for
it
you.
all.
And I love those are two very
Wonderful.
different flavors of man. So
And I
you
couldn't
got-
decide which flavor I wanted.
I respect that.
And were I writing it now, I would add Eowyn in there too. But
Respect.
All right then. So that's formative romance. What's a recent romance that you've enjoyed? Book, movie, TV,
Mm.
anything? I'll let you think.
Mm.
So I have recently really, really loved T. Kingfisher's books. So T.
Yes.
Kingfisher is Ursula Vernon
Oh.
writing fantasy for adults, and the Saint of Steel series, which is at the moment 3 standalone books, absolutely wonderful. Like if you're looking for things that have got that like swashbuckling adventure fantasy with a lot of humor, all 3 of them are standalone romances that are just so satisfying. They're so funny, and I think humor in romance and humor in fantasy is deeply underrated. And even better for me, all of the protagonists are in their 30s and they're tired. Like they just they sleep on their bedrolls and they wake up and they're like, oh, I can't do that the way I used to in my 20s. And like, you know, the adventures get in the way of them like just settling down and having a nice quiet life. And they spend a lot of time complaining about young people, and that speaks to me. I'd like there should be more romances about people who are in their 30s and just capital T tired.
Yeah.
yeah, I read Paladin's Grace recently, and it was one of those situations where my face was cramping the whole time because I was just doing the like, you hold it close to your face, like,
Yeah.
I love this so much.
Yeah. Yep. And like, so have you haven't read the other 2 yet?
No, I have them. I just haven't had a chance to read them yet.
Yeah.
But
And they all have like
I read
different.
Swordheart recently. I just haven't read the
Mm.
other 2. I loved Swordheart also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I read Paladin's Grace, Hope, and Strength in like 2 days, like all of them, just through them.
Wow.
Oh,
I'm
glorious.
going whenever I'm done with this like latest deadline. I'm saving them for a treat. I recently read The Love Hypothesis.
Ooh.
So fast, so quickly. It was so good. I loved it very much. The certified Raylo trash, so I mean, it was obviously going to appeal to me, but it was fantastic.
I'm shocked by this development.
Right? I thought
would
I hit
never
it so
guess. For me, this is like not technically a romance, but I do believe it is it's also not technically new, but to me, it hits both of these things. One of my things that got me through COVID was playing Breath of the Wild. And I do believe that Link and Zelda, specifically in Breath of the Wild, like if there is if there are 2 things I'm a sucker for, it's like a prince or princess and their like appointed knights. And it's
DOT.
also yes,
DOT
and it's
trope.
also I've lost all my memories, but the only thing I remember is your voice, and you're going to guide me through everything I need to do to find my way back to you. Those 2 things are what Breath of the Wild is. And you can't tell. And it's like set in like a beautiful, like lush post-apocalyptic world where it's just like the fringes of humanity clinging to magic and faith in like tiny little villages amongst like a rich, beautiful green world of like nature overtaking the machinery and like reclaiming. It's beautiful, and I think it's like high romance to me. It's technically they like exchange one actual line in the entire game. And speaking of like longing and restraint and filling in the blanks, I have read a lot of Zelda and Link Breath of the Wild specific fan fiction since I played that game. So it really does it for me.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really good. Yeah, and like amnesia trope done really well. There's something so satisfying about that. This idea that like you are the one anchor.
Literally, like the mechanics of the game are are Zelda, like Link, like rediscovering himself and his skills through remembering Zelda. It's like,
Oh,
it's really
Deep
good.
romance. Oh, that
oh,
sounds lovely.
that's good.
I think we have like maybe, I don't know how much time we have left, like 1 minute, 2 minutes?
2, I think.
I don't want to like launch us into a grand discussion of anything else,
Yeah.
really. Any other like recommendations of like really good romantic shit?
This is a really good book.
Oh, yeah. There's
I don't
random
know.
books
I
that
don't know
come
if you
out.
guys have heard of it, but I do think you should pick it up.
Such a pretty cover.
Yeah, actually, I
Oh,
absolutely
pretty.
am. I'm obsessed with the packaging of this book. It's beautiful.
I love the
Yeah,
color scheme so much.
I'm really excited to see what they do for the other 2 books in terms of like in keeping with that design, but different colors. Yep. I haven't seen the cover for book 2 yet, but I hear it is on the horizon, so I'm really excited to freak out about that when it happens. Yes. Oh, we're done.
I'm back. So the last thing, why don't y'all tell us what you're working on now or what we can look forward to next? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I'll go
I've
first.
handed in book. Yep.
Oh
go.
no, I was gonna let Freya go last because Freya's the most important person here because it is Freya's day. I'm currently I have my 3rd book coming out next year, and then I just started working on number 4, which is sort of a exes to lovers set on like a European backpacking trip.
Good.
Yes.
I have the 2nd book in the Wilderwood duology coming out next summer. It's called For the Throne. It's coming out in June. And then next fall, I have a story in The Gathering Dark, which is a folklore anthology that's coming out. And then I'm working on The Foxglove King, which is the 1st book in the Nightshade Kingdom trilogy, and that kicks off in summer of 2023.
Excellent. Well, the sequel to A Marvelous Light is coming out this time next year. I'm about to start writing book 3, which is the one with like the power imbalances and the fucking magical house bullshit. And I am also deep in the wilds of some contemporary romances about figure skaters, because why not? So that's how I'm diversifying away from historical fantasy.
Nice.
And obviously, if I have any news about that, I will let people know loudly. But that's what I'm working on.
All of this sounds so amazing. I'm super excited about Titanic Love because that sounds great.
The working title.
It's amazing. Like you can trap people in a confined space in the ocean. So much hijinks. Yeah.
So good.
Absolutely. And I just want to throw out there that my formative romance, even though it is not canon, is Xena and Gabrielle, which Xena Warrior Princess was my jam growing up. I might be showing how old I am with that, but that was my thing. And they were completely a lesbian couple, but they couldn't make it canon because at the time that wasn't something you could do on TV. So they were never canonically a couple, but they are a couple if you watch it. And so that was my first romance where I was like, I want to be this. It was amazing. And Freya, your editor says, editor whisper, for cover art updates, check your inbox after this event wraps up.
Like you want me to like live react? Hang on.
Yeah.
Yes, do it. Live react.
What if you hate it?
This is exciting.
I know. It would be bad if you hate it.
You were not expecting this. Hang on. Oh my god. The colors are incredible.
What? Can you tell us the colors?
I don't know. I can't see my editor. Roshi, am I allowed to tell them what color it is?
You'll never know.
Trying to see like relay.
Your editor is watching on YouTube and just made that comment, but I haven't seen anything else.
Okay, I think I had better not.
Okay. Blink twice.
I better not tell you anything about it.
Carol just
it's
said,
incredible. You'll all love it.
Amazing. Carol just said, publicist whisper, you won't hate it. I love live react.
You can,
yes. There you go. You have now all seen me get my first glimpse of book 2's cover.
Wow.
And it is incredible. I can say colors. Thank you,
you
Cara.
can say colors.
Excellent. Okay, so book 2 is green.
Ooh.
Which I'm so excited about. So like greeny, bluey, yellow.
I love how like all of the queer romances that are like the second in a series are doing like a green-blue palette.
Yes,
This is
yes.
true.
And all that
book
looks
two
so
is-
nice on my
is-
shelf.
Book 2 is sapphic, so it fits. There we go.
Oh, I can't wait.
Amazing. I'm so glad we got that live reaction. This
That
is
was amazing.
yeah. It's like here live, only in this event can you see the live reaction.
Freya sees her cover and it's beautiful.
Well, thank you all so much. This was amazing. I'm so happy that all of you joined us for this event. And I'm going to do it again here. Marvelous Light. Everyone should read it. Everyone should buy it. And
Yes, you
let's get a closer look just real quick at the cover because I have it here. There it is.
Wow.
So pretty.
So we have pink
It
and
is
purple, and then we have like green and blue. So
Mhm.
I would buy that
Um,
wallpaper.
Oh yeah.
I know, I would
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so pretty.
If I end up with like an enormous box of hard covers, I'm just going to take all of the covers off and like paper my one of my rooms. We'll
Yes.
see.
Yes, it's
Do
so
it.
good. So yes, please order books. You can order any of these authors' books at tummyandcruise.com/special order. Just go click on them. It's very easy. And we have all the authors' books here. So thank you all so, so much again for doing this event with us. Thank you everyone for watching. Go and buy books because that's why we're all here. and
Thank
and
you
we
so
will
much for hosting.
yes, we'll see
Yes,
y'all
thank
next time
you.
for the
Yeah.
next event. And have a good evening and a good day to Freya, who is now like 11 a.m. So have a
Yeah.
good day.